The best part of being a librarian is the quiet. But a new kind of quiet has settled over my life lately, the held breath quiet of being watched. It all started with a book request slip for a novel I thought no one else on earth had ever heard of. A book I hadn't spoken of to a single soul. A book I had just finished reading myself, in the privacy of my own home. My world is built on the Dewey Decimal System. It's a universe of quiet order, of crisp paper and the soft thud of a date stamp. I'm Harper, I'm 28, and the Northwood Public Library is my sanctuary. I know the regulars, the students who practically live in the study carrels during finals, the retirees who come for the large print mysteries, the moms and toddlers who fill the children's section with a joyful, chaotic energy that's the exception to the rule of silence. I love the predictability of it all. The 9:00 a.m. rush of patrons, the midday lull, the gentle hum of the fluorescent lights. My life runs on a schedule, and I like it that way. Then there was William. He was one of those quiet patrons who blend into the background. A man in his 50s, I'd guess, with graying temples and a wardrobe that seemed to consist entirely of beige and brown. He was neat, methodical, and always polite. He never made small talk, just a soft thank you and a slight nod when he checked out his books. For months, he was just another face, part of the library's familiar, comforting scenery. I first started to really notice him when his reading habits began to overlap with mine. It started subtly. I'd just finished a deep dive into the works of a forgotten 19th century poet, and a week later, William was checking out her collected works. I smiled to myself, a little flicker of connection. It's a rare pleasure to find someone who shares a niche interest. When I was going through a phase of reading dense historical accounts of the Silk Road, there he was, a few days behind me, requesting the same academic tomes through interlibrary loan. I mentioned it to my coworker, Sarah, one afternoon while we were reshelving. "It's kind of sweet, don't you think?" I'd said, running my fingers over the spines. "Like a silent book club." Sarah had shrugged, her focus on alphabetizing the fiction section. Or he just sees what you're reading at the checkout desk and gets curious. Some people are like that. Her explanation made sense, and I brushed it off. It was flattering, in a way. I've always prided myself on my eclectic taste, and having an admirer of my literary choices felt like a quiet compliment. The books were always returned on time, in perfect condition. He was a model patron. There was nothing, absolutely nothing, to raise a red flag. The real shift, the one that turned the quiet hum of my life into a high-pitched ringing of alarm, happened on a Tuesday. I had spent the previous weekend holed up in my apartment, completely absorbed in a bizarre, out-of-print sci-fi novel from the 1970s called The Echo Chamber. It was a strange, philosophical book about a man who discovers his reality is a construct built from his own memories. It wasn't a library book. It was a crumbling paperback I'd found in a dusty corner of a second-hand bookstore years ago. It had no library card, no checkout history. It was mine, and mine alone. On Tuesday morning, I walked in, set my tote bag behind the circulation desk, and started on the morning's tasks. The first thing I always did was check the request slips from the overnight drop box. There were the usual holds for the latest bestsellers, a few DVDs, and then one that made my blood run cold. It was a standard interlibrary loan request form, filled out in neat, precise block letters. The requested title: The Echo Chamber. The author was correct, the obscure publisher was correct, and the patron's name at the bottom was William Hargrove. My hands started to tremble. It was impossible. Coincidence was one thing, this was something else entirely. I hadn't brought the book to work. I hadn't logged it on any reading app. My social media is private, and even then, I rarely post about what I'm reading. The book was a ghost in the literary world. Finding it would take a deliberate, targeted search. How could he possibly know? I looked around the library, my gaze darting over the familiar faces. He wasn't there. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. Sarah's breezy explanation about him seeing books on my desk no longer held water. This was different. This felt like a violation, like he'd somehow peered into my living room window and seen the book on my nightstand. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe the book had a sudden, random resurgence online? Maybe a popular blogger mentioned it. I spent my entire lunch break scouring the internet, my fingers flying across the keyboard. Nothing. Not a single recent mention. The book was as obscure and forgotten as I'd thought. When William came in later that afternoon, his presence felt different. The air around him seemed to crackle with a tension only I could feel. He approached the desk to check out a stack of books on cryptography. He didn't look at me, just placed the books on the counter with his usual quiet precision. My heart was pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. I wanted to ask him, to say, "How did you know about that book?" But the words wouldn't come. What would I even be accusing him of? Requesting a book? It was absurd. He slid his library card across the counter. As I scanned his books, my eyes fell on the request slip I had pinned to the bulletin board behind me, his name stark against the white paper. I felt his gaze on me, and for the first time, I forced myself to meet his eyes. There was nothing there, just a flat, placid expression. But I knew he was watching my reaction. He was waiting for me to acknowledge his move in this twisted little game he was playing. He took his books, gave his customary nod, and walked away, his soft footsteps disappearing among the shelves. The library was silent again, but the quiet was no longer comforting. It was the heavy, loaded silence of a secret, and I was the only one who had heard it. The days following the echo chamber incident were a masterclass in gaslighting, all orchestrated by a man who never spoke a word to me. The game escalated, but its rules remained infuriatingly subtle. William was using the library's own systems as his weapon, turning my sanctuary into a maze where he was the architect and I was the rat. It started with the call slips. Patrons use them to request books that are stored in the archives. They're time-stamped, filed, and fulfilled by staff. Me, usually. A few days after the first incident, I found a call slip in the tray for a collection of Victorian-era essays on female hysteria. An odd choice, but not unheard of. I retrieved the dusty tome from the basement archives. When William came to collect it, he also checked out a modern book on behavioral psychology. The book he'd requested from the archives sat on the checkout counter, and I happened to glance at the table of contents. Chapter 3 was titled "The Fallacy of Intuition." I felt a chill snake down my spine. It was a message. He was telling me not to trust my gut, that I was being irrational, hysterical even. But how could I prove it? I was just a librarian checking out books. He hadn't broken a single rule. The next week, it was an interlibrary loan request for a very specific, out-of-state newspaper on microfilm. The date he requested? My birthday. I knew this because I had to process the form, my own date of birth staring back at me from the driver's license I'd used to verify my new address with HR just a month prior. My new address. The thought hit me like a physical blow. Our employee files were on the library's internal server. William was a tech consultant before he retired. My boss, Martha, had mentioned it once, impressed by his knowledge when he'd helped her fix a network issue. Did he have access? Could he see my records? I started to feel a constant, low-grade panic. Every time the bell above the library door chimed, my head would snap up. Every time I saw his neat, brown coat, my stomach would clench. I began meticulously documenting everything. I took pictures of the request slips with my phone, saved screenshots of the checkout histories, and kept a running log in a locked notebook. I needed evidence, something tangible that proved this wasn't all in my head. His methods grew more elaborate. He began using the checkout history itself as a canvas. One Monday, I logged into my own account to renew a book and saw my recent history: a guide to urban wildlife, the psychology of surveillance, and you're not paranoid, a guide to spotting hidden threats. I hadn't checked out any of those books, but the system said I had. They had been checked out and then immediately returned a few minutes later, just long enough to be logged in my history. He had found a way into my account. He was curating my reading list, leaving a trail of breadcrumbs that felt like a direct, chilling threat. The titles were a conversation. He was telling me he saw me, that he knew I was onto him, and that he thought my fear was a joke. I decided I had to tell Martha, my boss. She's a kind, no-nonsense woman who has run the library for 30 years. I sat in her office, my hands shaking as I laid out my logbook and photos. I explained the sequence of events, my voice trembling as I tried to connect the dots for her. "Harper," she said, her expression a mixture of pity and confusion. She took off her reading glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose. "Let me see if I understand. A patron, Mr. Hargrove, is checking out books. Some of them are on similar topics to your own interests. He's using the request forms for their intended purpose. And you think his book choices are a threat?" "It's the pattern, Martha," I insisted, my voice rising. "The book about paranoia appearing in my checkout history. The newspaper from my birthday. The book I'd only read in my own house. It's not a coincidence." "He's an intelligent man," she countered, her tone gentle, the way you'd speak to a frightened child. "Maybe he's just eccentric. And the checkout history, that could easily be a system glitch. We just updated the software. You know how buggy it's been. Harper, he hasn't done anything wrong. He hasn't spoken to you, he hasn't followed you, he hasn't threatened you. What would you have me do? Ban a man for his reading choices?" I left her office feeling utterly defeated. She was right. From the outside, it looked like nothing. Less than nothing. It looked like I was the one who was unstable. I was the hysterical woman from the Victorian essay. William had created a perfect prison of plausible deniability. I felt a profound sense of isolation. The one place on earth I'd felt safe was now the source of my deepest terror, and no one else could see the bars. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying Martha's words in my head. "He hasn't followed you. But had he? How would I know?" The thought was terrifying. The final straw came on a rainy Friday afternoon. The library was nearly empty. William came in, not with a stack of books but with a single, slim volume. He placed it on the counter for return. It was a book of local maps, the kind that shows detailed property lines and street layouts. As I scanned it, a small slip of paper fell out. It wasn't a bookmark. It was a call slip, the kind we use for archived materials. It was blank except for two things. In the title field, he had written my full name, Harper Ann Connolly, and in the call number field, he had written my home address. He hadn't just looked up my address on the server, he was showing me he had it. He was letting me know, in the quietest, most undeniable way possible, that the game wasn't confined to the library walls anymore. He knew where I lived. The hell-breath quiet of being watched was no longer just a feeling, it was a fact. Seeing my name and address written in his precise, steady hand on that call slip broke something inside me. The fear didn't vanish, but it crystallized into something harder, sharper. The despair of being unheard by Martha, the frustration of his flawless, rule-abiding torment, it all burned away, leaving behind a cold, clear resolve. If the system was the weapon he used to terrorize me, then I would use the system to fight back. He thought he was the only one who knew how to manipulate the quiet, ordered world of the library. He was wrong. I had built my life here. I knew its secrets. My first move was to stop playing his game. I ignored the book requests, the curated checkout histories, the subtly placed literary references. I treated him like any other patron, a polite, professional smile, a quick scan of his books, and a generic have a good day. I refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing my fear. Inside, my nerves were screaming, but on the outside, I was a librarian, an icon of calm and composure. This shift in my behavior seemed to unsettle him. I saw it in the slight flicker of his eyes when I didn't react, the way his placid mask seemed to tighten. The hunter was confused that the prey had stopped running. My nights were no longer for restless, terrified tossing and turning. They were for research. If he could dig into my life, I could dig into his. His library card application was my starting point. William Hargrove. An address in a quiet suburb on the other side of town. A phone number. No email. It wasn't much, but it was a beginning. I started with the library's own digital archives. I searched his name, cross-referencing it with local newspaper databases going back decades. For days, I found nothing. Just the mundane artifacts of a quiet life, mentions in old high school honor rolls, a notice of his parents' passing. It was a digital dead end. He was a ghost, just as he intended to be. But then I remembered what Martha had said. He was a retired tech consultant. He knew his way around networks. He knew how systems worked, how to find information, and, presumably, how to hide it. What if he wasn't just using our system, but had left a footprint somewhere? I started digging into the library's server logs. It was a long shot. I wasn't a tech expert, but I was methodical, and I knew what I was looking for: unauthorized access. Anything that looked like a breach originating from a public terminal around the times he was in the library. It took me 3 nights of sitting in my locked apartment, my laptop screen casting a pale glow on my face, before I found it. An anomaly. A series of remote logins to the staff-side server from a public access computer terminal within the library. The user wasn't an employee. It was a ghost account, a backdoor. The timestamps of the logins were chilling. They corresponded almost perfectly with dates and times that I had later discovered his unnerving messages. He had been inside our system. He had seen my employee file, my address, my birthday. He had manipulated my checkout history. This was it. This was the proof I needed, the first concrete evidence that what he was doing was more than just checking out creepy books. It was illegal. The knowledge was empowering, but it wasn't enough. Proving he'd hacked the system would get him banned, maybe even arrested. But it wouldn't make me feel safe. I needed to understand why. What was his end game? What did he want from me? The obsession was too specific, too personal. The real breakthrough came from a place I hadn't thought to look. We have a reciprocal borrowing agreement with the university library across town. Their system is older, clunkier, and, as I would discover, less secure. On a hunch, I used my librarian credentials to access their patron database. I searched his name. His profile popped up, and it was much more detailed than ours. It included a note from a previous librarian. The note was dated 5 years ago. It was an internal flag, a warning. Patron William H. has exhibited obsessive behavior towards a female student worker, name redacted. Monitored her reading history via public terminals and left coded messages in requested books. Student worker filed a complaint, but no official action was taken due to lack of overt threat. Patrons borrowing privileges were temporarily suspended. Use caution. My blood turned to ice. It was the exact same pattern. He had done this before. He had a history. He wasn't just a creep who had latched onto me. I was the latest in a series. He was a predator, and the library was his hunting ground. This wasn't a game he was playing with me. It was a script he was reenacting. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place with one more search. Armed with the knowledge that he had a history, I started searching public records, court documents, anything I could find. And there it was. A restraining order filed 15 years ago. The petitioner was a woman named Eleanor Vance. The respondent was William Hargrove. I found a small news article about the case online. Eleanor Vance had been the head librarian at a small, private library in a neighboring state. She accused William of a relentless campaign of psychological harassment, using the library's own systems to stalk her. The case had been dismissed. The judge ruled that his actions, while unsettling, did not constitute a credible threat. Eleanor Vance had quit her job and moved away a month later. He hadn't escalated. He hadn't needed to. He had won. He had driven her from her life, her career, her home, all without ever breaking a single rule a judge could recognize. This was his goal. Not violence, but a quiet, methodical erasure. He wanted to make my sanctuary so terrifying that I would flee it myself. He didn't want to hurt me, he wanted to replace me. He wanted to own the space I occupied. And now I knew I couldn't run. If I did, he would just find another librarian, another quiet woman in a quiet place, and the cycle would begin all over again. The maximum point of suspense wasn't about what he would do to me. It was the chilling realization that my choice was no longer just about my own survival, it was about stopping him from ever doing this to anyone else. Knowing his history changed the equation. This wasn't just my fight anymore. I felt a strange, grim connection to the student worker and to Eleanor Vance, women I'd never met but whose fear I now understood intimately. Running away was no longer an option. Giving him the satisfaction of quietly winning, of erasing me from my own life, was unthinkable. He was a snake who had perfected the art of hiding in plain sight. I had to find a way to make everyone see the fangs. My plan was simple, and it used his own methods against him. I had the server logs showing the illegal access, but I knew that might not be enough for Martha, or even the police, to grasp the full scope of the psychological terror. I needed to catch him in the act. I needed to create a situation where his obsession would compel him to break his one golden rule: plausible deniability. I started by creating a ghost of my own. I used my administrative access to create a fake book entry in our library's catalog. It was a title I invented: The Librarian's Lament, a study in occupational isolation. The author was E. Vance. The entry was sparse, with no cover art and a vague, one-sentence description. I listed its status as in processing, a limbo state meaning the book had been acquired but wasn't yet on the shelves. It was bait, a direct reference to his last known victim, a puzzle I knew his obsessive mind wouldn't be able to resist. Then I began to set the stage. I started leaving a trail for him to follow, just as he had for me. I used the public computer terminals to search for information on Eleanor Vance. I requested books on stalking and harassment, but I did it under my own name, openly. I checked out a book on digital forensics. I was performing for an audience of one. I wanted him to know that I knew. I wanted him to feel the tables turning, to feel the unnerving sensation of being watched. The tension in the library became a physical presence. I could feel his eyes on me from behind the stacks. His visits became more frequent, his placid expression now tinged with something I could only describe as agitated curiosity. He was trying to figure out my next move. The silent book club was over. This was a chess match, and he hadn't anticipated that I'd start playing my own pieces. The trap was sprung on a Thursday evening, an hour before closing. I logged into the system and changed the status of my fake book, The Librarian's Lament, from in processing to available. I placed it in a specific, obscure location, the rare books room, a glass-enclosed section of the library that was monitored by a high-visibility security camera and required a librarian to unlock the door. Then, I made one final move. I logged into the staff-side server and created a fake employee file, a new hire. The name on the file was Eleanor Vance. I included a start date for the following Monday. Then, I sat at the main circulation desk, my heart hammering against my ribs, and I waited. It took him less than 20 minutes. He must have been monitoring the catalog from home. He came into the library, his usual beige coat damp from the evening rain. He didn't look at me. He walked straight to a public computer terminal, his movements stiff and deliberate. I watched him on the small monitor that showed the public computer screens. I saw him type in the title. I saw the screen display the book's location. He approached the desk. His face was pale, his composure finally cracking. For the first time, his voice was more than a soft murmur. "I'd like to see the book in the rare books room," he said, his voice tight. "Of course," I replied, my own voice surprisingly steady. "Which title is it?" He slid a slip of paper across the counter. On it was written The Librarian's Lament. "This one," he said, his eyes boring into me, searching for a reaction. I stood up, my keys jingling in my hand. "Right this way, Mr. Hargrove." As I led him toward the glass-walled room, I could see Martha emerging from her office, drawn by the unusual request. Sarah was watching from behind the reference desk. They were about to see the show. I unlocked the door and gestured for him to enter. The room was small, filled with the scent of old paper and leather. The camera in the corner had a clear, unobstructed view. He walked straight to the shelf where the book was supposed to be, his back to me. Of course, there was no book. He ran his fingers along the empty space on the shelf, his shoulders tensing. "It seems to be missing," he said, turning around. His mask of calm was completely gone. His face was a contortion of rage and confusion. "Where is it?" "There is no book, William," I said, my voice echoing slightly in the small, quiet room. I didn't move from the doorway. "Just like there is no new employee named Deliner Vance starting on Monday." His face went white. The final piece clicked into place for him. He understood that I knew everything, and in that moment he broke his rule. "You meddling little bee," he began, taking a step toward me, his hand raised. He never finished the sentence. The sight of this quiet, unobtrusive man suddenly turning venomous made Martha gasp. She was already on the phone, her voice sharp and clear as she spoke to the police. William froze. He looked from me to Martha, the security camera, the realization dawning on him. The trap wasn't the book. The trap was him. His reaction, his loss of control, was the one thing he could no longer deny. He had finally done something overtly, unambiguously threatening. He had exposed himself. The aftermath was messy and quiet. The police came, with my logbook, the server records, the security footage of his outburst, and Martha's eyewitness account. They finally had something to act on. They issued a no-contact order, and the library board banned him for life. I never saw him again. But the quiet in the library is different now. It's no longer the comforting silence of my sanctuary. It's a quiet I have to work for, a peace I have to consciously maintain. I see William in the faces of other patrons sometimes, a flicker of his quiet intensity, and my breath catches in my throat. The scars are deep. He took a place of safety and turned it into a weapon against me. But in the end, I learned how to wield it better. I didn't run. I stayed. I'm still here, in my world of paper and ink. But now I know that the most dangerous monsters aren't the ones who scream and shout. They're the ones who use the silence against you, the ones who hide in the pages, waiting to write you into their own twisted story. The difference is now I know how to write my own ending. Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe and give this video a like. We appreciate everyone and can't wait to bring more stories your way.